Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Mate. Thank you so much for being here. Our website, as always, is usefulidiotspodcast.com. And this week, as is becoming the norm around here, which is we have so much to talk about, we're bringing you two different interviews. We'll be looking at the latest Israeli assault on a Freedom Flotilla ship trying to break the blockade of Gaza and the brutal treatment of some of the brave people who were on board, especially Christian Smalls, the labor organizer who organized Amazon workers for Amazon's first ever union. Very brave person, was the only African-American on this ship and was beaten up by Israeli forces in detention afterwards. So we'll be talking about that. And then also we'll get an update on what's happening in the West Bank from journalist Jasper Nathaniel, who's been covering things there on the ground and has a lot of experience. And because the Gaza genocide is so horrific, what's happening in the West Bank has been overshadowed, but it's also terrible. And we'll be looking at that and a whole lot more.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of Israel and how terrible the situation is in Gaza, let's start off with Democrat Suck by looking at a clip of Michigan Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin during an interview that she did with Krista Ball and Sagar Enjeti on Breaking Points this week. And here she is being asked on whether she would cut off military funding to Israel.
But will you cut off aid to Israel so long as they're committing crimes against humanity?
There is a difference between a weapon to protect a country from incoming missiles versus other type. Offensive and defensive weapons are different.
So would you support offensive weapons ban? Like, would you stop any offensive aid to Israel?
That certainly, to me, would be a place to look, but I'm not going to cut off a blanket next sale on a defensive weapon comes through. No.
I also reject that because, for example, if Senator Slotkin, if you were asked to support defensive weapons for Iran, defensive weapons for Russia, you wouldn't back that.
No, but Iran, but
they're defensive. They're just protecting civilians, right? So how is it different?
But because Israel's being shot at.
So is Russia.
So is Iran. Yeah. So is Russia.
Ukraine's shooting at Russia right now.
I'm sorry. This is the difference between allies, partners, and adversaries.
Why is it an ally then? What are they doing right now, which makes it an ally?
I think allied relationships, just like Lithuania right now, like an allied relationship or a partner relationship is a long-standing relationship of information sharing and diplomacy. And that is, to me, it's not a like every day we decide Lithuania is our ally or not.
A couple things here. Great job from Crystal and Sagar pushing back on her attempt to justify defensive aid by asking her why that's justifiable when she would never give defensive aid to a country like Russia. But also, I like the way that her answer to their follow-up question, which is why are we allies with Israel in the first place, is like, well, Lithuania. Like that really speaks to Americans. Like Americans are really conscious of our relationship to Lithuania.
Yeah, and this defensive argument is the same one that AOC made recently. Right. But it's like, in the case of AOC was recognizing that Israel is committing a genocide. So if that's the case, why are you in favor of giving a genocidal state anything? And the same thing here with Slotkin. Like, she's not accusing Israel of genocide, but she is acknowledging they're causing a massive humanitarian crisis. And so if a country is causing a humanitarian crisis, like forget genocide, again, like why are you in support of giving them defensive weapons? Because your weaponry is a part of your arsenal, which means like whatever you want to label it, defensive or offensive, it's helping you wage the war that's causing a humanitarian crisis. So it's just such a silly excuse. And then there's the fact that there was just recently a vote in Congress on whether or not to give new offensive weaponry to Israel. Bernie Sanders had a measure trying to block it. And Elissa Slotkin wasn't there.
Right. Somehow she missed it. Yeah. Guess it's not that important. Yeah. Elissa Slotkin is a very dishonest person, as you'll see. It's not surprising because she was in the CIA, of course. But here she is trying to kind of weasel her way out of a question from Krista Ball about AIPAC, and she tries to shame her, but it kind of backfires. Let's take a look.
And so you stop accepting their funding?
You got to get your facts straight. I have not been endorsed by AIPAC. I'm sorry. I was the first Jew elected to the Senate that was not endorsed by any Jewish group. AIPAC, J Street.
You've been the recipient of their funds.
In 2018, when I first ran, people who were members, yes. But I've not been endorsed since then. And I just got to be honest, like, I think that this is where facts really matter. I've had very, very difficult conversations with my colleagues in that organization.
So she's being totally condescending, but she says something interesting, which is that she refers to the people in AIPAC as colleagues. I'm not sure that's like the resounding rejection of AIPAC that she thinks it is. Right? Like, you don't call them colleagues if you're so staunchly opposed to them. And I think she's referring specifically to, formal endorsements, but public records show that she received contributions from pro-Israel groups, including AIPAC and J Street during the 2022 election cycle. Way to try to be condescending while also being totally dishonest, Slotkin. The world of fast fashion has complicated clothing production by shipping cheap parts around the world to whomever can sew them the cheapest. And now you're paying the price with rising costs. Back in the 1960s, 95% of clothing Americans bought were made in the United States of America. Today, it's only 3%. That's why we're so excited about our sponsor, American Giant. American Giant is about keeping things simple and close to home. They aren't affected by tariffs because their products never leave the U.S. Mega corporations obsessed with growth are churning out cheap stuff from poor materials, leaving working people behind, hollowing out communities, and piling up junkyards. Buy your clothes locally to support jobs in towns that help stitch communities together. Support American-made, tariff-free clothing with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code USEFUL at american-giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code USEFUL at american-giant.com.
All right. For Republican suck, there are so many choices. Trump, after all, is presiding over the genocide in Gaza. He's gone back and forth. He's talked about, yes, there is starvation. We're going to take care of it, but he's doing absolutely nothing. And then he was complaining that people aren't thanking him for giving aid to the GHF, which stands for Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which really should be called the Gaza Holocaust Front, because it's an Israeli-U.S. front group that's destroyed the UN aid system, replaced it with this U.S.-Israeli group, reduced the number of aid sites from over 400 to 4, and is using those aid sites to kill people, which continues right through this recording. Just every day almost, there's a massacre of people lining up for aid. So there's that, obviously, if Republicans suck. But since the show is so heavily focused on Israel-Palestine today, let's look at another area where Republicans suck. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he made a really interesting admission on the domestic front. And talking about these so-called Trump accounts, which is this new program Trump has where every newborn until 2028 will receive a $1,000 government-subsidized account that can be used to invest. And Scott Bessent says the Trump accounts have a long-term agenda.
But in a way, it is a backdoor for privatizing Social Security. Like, Social Security is a defined benefit plan paid out that, to the extent that if all of a sudden these accounts grow and you have in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for your retirement, then that's a game changer too.
So they present this as like, oh, here, we're just going to give every baby a head start. We're going to help them grow their future. Yeah, to provide a backdoor for privatizing Social Security, which has been a long-standing Republican plan. Reagan first talked about this. They want to basically take the guaranteed income that the elderly have after they reach retirement age and turn it into gambling. Gambling on the stock market. And George Bush tried to do it too. But back then, there was enough of a backlash where he stood down. But now, look, in this new era, the Trump team feels so confident. They've just taken a lot of money out of Medicaid. They've taken a lot of money out of food assistance. And now Social Security, according to Scott Bessent, is next.
Yeah. Well, I guess thanks for saying the quiet part out loud, Scott.
You can always count on Republicans to say the quiet part out loud more than Democrats. That's for sure.
For Isn't That Weird? Let's take a look at a weird phenomenon happening on Grindr, the gay dating app.
Grindr is blocking one phrase, and one phrase only. Grindr won't let users say, "No Zionists" in their bio. This is the error message people are seeing right now when they try and post this, and we have confirmed it. But here's the kicker. You can say, "No Arabs, no blacks, no Muslims, no Jews, and even no trans." All of that goes through. Grindr says it bans hateful and offensive content, but this rule, it's nowhere in their terms of service.
Okay, so obviously Grindr cares a lot about anti-Semitism, right? Which is why they ban no Jews. Oh, wait, no, they don't ban no Jews. They just ban no Zionists. So it's hate speech to say that you don't want to date a Zionist. It's not hate speech to say you don't want to date a Jew, don't want to date a black person, don't want to date a trans person.
Maybe they got to change the name of Grindr to Genocider.
Ooh, I like it. Yeah. Yeah, you get to keep the first letter and a lot of the other letters in there too. So it's a pretty efficient change up. Yeah. Isn't that insane though?
Yeah, that's terrible. And it's very weird. All things in one. It's amazing. And obviously they felt compelled to go out of their way to ban the term no Zionist because a lot of people were putting that in.
Exactly, right.
Why else would they do that? So, I mean, good for the Grindr community for, having a conscience. I'm sorry that the app is interfering, but that's, obviously the people who support genocide were getting offended and they must have complained.
Yeah. And, they're like, I can't find any dates now on Grindr. This is awful. Please. But also, if you're a Zionist on Grindr, do you want to have the people who say no Zionists unable to say that? Because you're just going to waste your time. And you're going to meet up with someone who doesn't want a Zionist, and you could have stayed home and not gone out with that person.
Yeah, look, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't gotten this yet. For a lot of people out there, especially if you look at polls now, being someone who supports Israel, supports genocide, it's going to be a deal breaker.
Yeah, just maybe. So I think you're right, Aaron. I think Grindr actually should stay the same, and someone else should start a genocider website.
There we go. We look forward to the genocider app in the App Store coming soon.
So, Aaron, what do we have for Isn't That Terrible?
For Isn't That Terrible, let's go back to the aforementioned vote that was just held in the Senate. Now, Bernie Sanders put forward a measure to block the sale of offensive weaponry to Israel. And for the first time, a majority of Democrats, a majority of the Democratic caucus in the Senate voted in favor. It voted to block this military support. And overall, the measure failed because Republicans joined with enough Democrats to defeat it. But more Democrats than not voted for the first time to block military aid to Israel. And that is a sign of, I don't even know if we can call it baby steps because the progress is so slow, but it's something. It does reflect some positive direction that we're going in, that enough Democratic senators for the first time felt compelled to vote against sending military aid to Israel. That it's important. It shouldn't be overlooked. Here, though, are the Democrats who joined with Republicans to continue military weapon sales to Israel. Here's the list via Ken Klippenstein. So we got Michael Bennett, Richard Blumenthal, Cory Booker, by the way, who's up for re-election in 2026. So, he could face a primary challenge. So could Chris Coons, my old friend who got me kicked off a train when I asked him why he didn't support a ceasefire. John Fetterman, of course. Kirsten Gillibrand, and Adam Schiff, my personal favorite, and Chuck Schumer. And
Ron Wyden, that's kind of disappointing. Mark Warner, not disappointing. Chuck Schumer, as he pointed out. Jackie Rosen, not disappointing. But and Gillibrand, of course, because as you guys covered, I believe, at the Gray Zone. I don't think we covered it here, but she had the most disgusting smear of Zohran Mamdani that she engaged in on
she did. She accused him of supporting global jihad.
Yeah.
What actually happened was when asked to condemn a phrase he never used, which is globalized intifada, he declined. And so declining to condemn a phrase he never used it goes from that to him supporting the use of the spread of global jihad in the eyes of Kristen Gillibrand. She later apologized in kind of a tepid way, but yeah, she did apologize. Maybe
she should be called Kristen Jihad Brand.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, Senator Ron Wyden, you would think he would have a different take because he has some progressive credentials, but he's repeatedly voted to arm Israel.
So he's a PEP. He's what we call a PEP, a progressive except on Palestine.
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I think it's fair to say. That's a case, by the way, where if you're progressive media and you're interviewing a progressive lawmaker, you got to ask them about their votes like this. And unfortunately, people like Ron Wyden have gone on some progressive shows and gotten a pass. And it's like, I understand if you don't have a full-on confrontation, but look at what Crystal Ball just did with Lisa Slotkin, and just and honestly, I think what happened there, I think one of the reasons why Lisa Slotkin missed that vote I mean, her excuse was that she's going on the Stephen Colbert show. But I wouldn't be surprised if, she had extra motivation to miss that vote after the grilling she got from Crystal Ball, because Crystal Ball made the point to her in their discussion, how can you possibly vote to arm this government that's causing this crisis, that's starving and killing civilians?
That's pretty cringe. Although I guess that's a liberal, perfect excuse. You can excuse doing anything or missing anything if your excuse is that you need to go on the Colbert Report.
Now, listen, I want to turn to Bernie Sanders because, to his credit, he put forward this resolution and he's done some important things. And I don't want to downplay those. I don't just want to dismiss what Bernie Sanders has done because he says things I don't agree with. But I do want to point out, though, that in presenting this measure, which I really think is laudable and he should be applauded for putting it forward to try to block weapons sales to Israel, he still put out talking points that I think don't advance his cause and that I think are just wrong. And this is not to discredit his effort or to diminish it, because it's important what he did in standing up against against military sales to Israel. But I think the way he presents it is based on some falsehoods and some catering to Israeli talking points that just shouldn't be happening. So this is some of Bernie Sanders said in putting forward his resolution to block arms sales to Israel.
Hamas is a terrorist organization which began this war with a brutal terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, that killed 1,200 innocent Israelis and took 250 hostages. Everyone agrees with that.
I'm sorry, Bernie. No, not everybody agrees with that. First of all, Hamas didn't start this. This starts with Israel ethnically cleansing Palestinians at the origins of Israel in 1948 and stealing their homes, and then putting them under a brutal military occupation in 1967, and then imposing a brutal siege in the mid-aughts and carrying out massacre after massacre over the years, including when Palestinians rose up in 2018 in the Great March of Return in a nonviolent protest where they were gunned down by Israeli soldiers using U.S. weapons. So that's just part of the background. So you can't go with this trope that Hamas started all this, because Hamas, whatever you think of October 7th, that was an act of resistance against the military occupation. And that's when he gets to 1,200 innocent civilians were killed on October 7th by Hamas and Palestinian militants.
He says innocent Israelis, by the way.
Innocent Israelis. I'm sorry. If you want to say that the civilians who were killed are innocent, that's totally fair. But not all those 1,200 were civilians. There were soldiers who were part of a army putting Gaza under a brutal military occupation. And, by the laws of war, by international standards, those aren't innocent civilians. Those are combatants who are taking part in a belligerent occupation. So, and then he goes on to say that Israel has every right to defend itself. But actually, no, if you're an occupying power, you don't have the right to go attack the people you've been occupying for decades. You have the obligation to end your occupation. And until you can grasp that that's at the heart of all this, as well-intentioned as his efforts are and as appreciated as they are, because look, he's doing the very hard task of going up against the Israel lobby and trying to cut off weapons to Israel, and that's very admirable. But if you're going to do that and still cater to the talking points of the occupying regime, of the apartheid regime, you're going to undermine your own cause. I think that's what Bernie Sanders did here, as admirable as his efforts were.
I agree with a lot of what you said. I think it's unfortunate that he has to spout some of these talking points. Again, like you, I appreciate what he did. I think it's also, what's hard is that we're so used to Bernie being this really moral authority and being very simple and straightforward about it, right? Like Medicare for all, healthcare is a human right. And while he's done some good legislative stuff or tried to do some good legislative stuff on Israel, he hasn't embraced the kind of the simple moral framing that he has when it comes to healthcare, right? Which is ceasefire now, or stop the genocide. He still won't call it a genocide. And when experts are calling it a genocide, I think you can defer to their expertise. Experts who don't have ulterior motives.
Yeah, I don't actually mind that he won't call it a genocide. To me, it's just semantics. But what I don't accept is catering to Israeli propaganda. And by the way, that includes also, if you're going to talk about the people killed on October 7th, you have to at least acknowledge that Israel killed some of those people. Right. I don't know how many because Israel's blocked a a credible investigation and is covered up. But we know they enacted the Hannibal Directive. We know that they fired on people with helicopters and tanks, and certainly that killed some Israelis. So I just don't believe in. I don't care if you don't adopt the language I use, but don't at least adopt falsehoods and don't adopt propaganda that presupposes the legitimacy of the Israeli occupation. That to me is just unacceptable.
Yeah. Although, of course, I mean, the language is important because legally, when it's a genocide, that requires action to stop it. But yes, that's not I hear what you're saying. That for you, it's more of a question of the accepting Israel's right to occupy that is problematic for you, and framing and not acknowledging that armed resistance against an occupier is actually part of international humanitarian law, which is not the same thing as killing civilians.
Well, I hope Arnie and his staff have enjoyed this instruction. I hope they screened it in their office. And for everybody else, those have been your 4 basic food groups. This week, we have 2 interviews for you, starting with Jasper Nathaniel. He is a journalist covering Israel-Palestine. He has a Substack called infinitejazz.substack.com, which we will link to. He also reports for outlets including Dropsite News and The Baffler. And we are going to speak to Jasper about the overlooked Israeli takeover and terror in the occupied West Bank, which has been overshadowed by the genocide in Gaza. Jasper has on-the-ground experience about what it's like in the West Bank, where Palestinians are routinely murdered with impunity by Israeli soldiers and settlers, and their land is stolen. And all of this has been ignored for a long time, but especially ever since Israel began its mass murder campaign inside of Gaza. So here is our interview with Jasper Nathaniel. Jasper Nathaniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We wanted to have you on because, for obvious reasons, the world attention is on the genocide in Gaza, but that has meant that all the atrocities going on in the West Bank have been totally overshadowed. And you've been on the ground there several times, reporting on the reality in the West Bank that the rest of the world is just simply ignoring. So, before we get into some specific incidents, some recent, high-profile murders by Israeli forces and settlers of Palestinians there. Talk to us about the overall picture in the West Bank that's being overshadowed.
It actually starts before October 7th. It starts in 1967, obviously, or before that. But the sort of latest escalation, it starts in February 2023. So what happened was, I think a lot of people probably know that Netanyahu built this coalition with these far-right fanatical theocrats in order to be able to have a majority governing coalition and stay in power, because he was facing all these corruption charges. So it's not to say that Netanyahu is not a far-right maniac himself, but the people that he brings into his coalition, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and some others, are sort of next level. And what happens in February 2023 is that Smotrich, who was the finance minister, and Smotrich lives in a settlement. He grew up in settlements. He was one of those kids that you see today on film running around, throwing rocks, wearing masks. That was him. And now he's the finance minister. But what he does is he works out a deal with the defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And what it does is he basically installs himself inside the Defense Department as an additional minister of defense so that he can build essentially a shadow government to oversee the West Bank. And the reason he had to do that is because from a legal perspective, the West Bank is a military occupation. And military occupations actually nominally have to adhere to the Geneva Convention and Hague and various international laws. So the Israeli government is not legally allowed to govern the West Bank. The military has to. So Smotrich, who is not a military person, he's a civilian, installs himself in the Defense Department and basically builds an entire civilian chain of command of people like him, far-right, fanatical, messianic settlers who think the West Bank, they call it Judea and Samaria, this is the real sort of cradle of Jewish civilization. And what they do from there is They eliminate all of the checks and balances that had slowed the settler movement, prevented them from being able to demolish every Palestinian village, build settlements, unchecked. It's not to say they weren't already out of control, but there were actually some obstacles. Smotrich just clears those obstacles out of the way. And one of the things that they do, in addition to ramping up demolitions and settlement building, is he instructs the police there to stop enforcing laws against settlers. And so settlers now are able to build wherever they want, build what are called illegal outposts. They are terrorizing Palestinian villages, knowing that they will not be arrested. They are not subject to administrative detention. And so there is actually a fundamental change in that the settlers now realize, they can't stop us anymore. I mean, there was actually a time when the military and the settlers clashed. Because the military, this is in no way a defense of the Israeli army, but they, from a sort of institutional level, they don't have the same ideological commitments as a Smotrich, whose entire worldview is about annexing the West Bank. So they get those people out of the way.
I remember seeing videos of them when they would call the soldiers Nazis.
Exactly. That was a big one. They would call them Nazis. And so that just doesn't happen anymore. And so then after October 7th, things are already really bad, obviously. And then I think it's fair to say Smotrich immediately sees the opportunity to, knowing that both the world was not going to be paying attention to the West Bank, very importantly, the Israeli public was going to stop caring about the settlement movement. I mean, the settlers are not, and this is, not to, I don't have that many nice things to say about the general populace there, but the settlers were not popular per se, but they just didn't care anymore. I mean, the only thing that matters after October 7th is security and revenge. And Smotrich immediately begins positioning the Palestinian Authority as just like Hamas. That they have some poll that shows that I don't know if it's legitimate, but it doesn't matter. That shows that some percentage of Palestinians in the West Bank supported October 7th, and so they immediately, all the things they were already doing, they start framing it as a security issue as well. And so now, really, everything is unchecked. And just to jump to now where we are, is the settlers have basically systematized this process of what they do is they set their sights on a Palestinian village that they think is vulnerable. Usually these days it's shepherding villages, certainly places that don't have armed resistance. And they build an outpost maybe a couple hundred meters away from it. And again, once upon a time, the soldiers might come and actually dismantle it, but that's just not happening anymore. And then every single night, they will go and terrorize the village, set fires, in some cases, assault people, in many cases, assault people, shoot people, burn houses down. And during the day, they are frightening their livestock. They're driving their ATVs around the livestock. Which is a big deal if you're a shepherd and you have people terrorizing your flock, then you really can't do your job. And they basically do this until they try to get the settlers to the villagers to pick up and leave. And in I think 60 something cases, it's worked. And so the point of this is these videos that you're seeing of these pogroms, settler pogroms that are happening. And last night, 4 different villages had arson fire set by settlers. 1 person died. It's not random attacks. I mean, this is part of a system to ethnically cleanse the West Bank. And the last thing I'll just say is, just yesterday, a story broke that Smotrich has, he's also the finance minister. So he siphoned off some budget, which he always does, to literally give ATVs, drones, night vision goggles, and other military grade equipment to settlers in the West Bank. And it was reported that the last time they did this in April, one of the people who they had given this stuff to was Yinon Levy, who just murdered somebody in Masriyata. So that's basically where we are. I know that was a little long-winded, but hopefully it contextualizes.
Well, let's talk more about that specific case you just mentioned. So the settler named Yunon Levy, who was previously sanctioned by the U.S., Trump comes in, removes the sanctions, and now he just murders Ada Hatalin, who was an activist, a teacher, played a really key role in the film No Other Land, which won the Oscar for Best Documentary, which follows Palestinians as they resist the terror of Jewish settlers. And now he is murdered. So talk to us about, who he was and who is his murderer.
And also about the interview that you just did with a U.S. medic who was at the scene of the murder.
Yeah. Okay. So Masafer Yatta, it's in the South Hebron Hills. And this is like, it's one of those shepherding villages that we're talking about, except it's a pretty big one. There's thousands of people there. And there's, I think maybe 15 to 20, I think maybe 19 separate, what they call hamlets that are sort of connected by roads. And in the 80s, the Israeli military just declared this is a military training zone. And by declaring a military training zone, they now have the legal right to do whatever they want, demolish houses, certainly practice shooting and things like that. It was actually caught up in the Israeli legal system for decades, though. They were fighting it in court, and they had some really good attorneys in Israel, I guess, and they were slowing it down. But all that time, settlements were building, outposts were building, and the settlers were just increasingly sort of terrorizing people. And after that change that I mentioned, February 23, they start actually coming in and demolishing houses and things like that. So things are getting really bad. Right after October 7th, actually, there was a shooting that you see right at the end of No Other Land, where a settler came down the hill, shoots Zachariah Adra in the stomach. This is actually an important piece of context. So that shooting was caught on film. It was on October 13th, 2023. You can see as clear as day that these guys have just come down the hill, and a couple of locals come out to confront them. They are, of course, unarmed. And the guy just shoots Zachariah in the stomach, and then they just sort of retreat like they're in the military. They know exactly who that guy is. His name is Yitzhak Nir. He lives in the settlement up the hill. His dad was a convicted terrorist, actually. We know exactly who he is. He never spent a day in jail. I think that they said at one point that they confiscated his gun, but I honestly find that even that hard to believe. And I spoke to the attorney who was there for the court proceedings, which are sham hearings basically, and he said that this guy Yitzhak he was just smiling and laughing the entire time. Not only was there no remorse, but there was no concern at all, like, oh, I shot somebody, maybe I'm going to get in trouble, like just totally lighthearted. So that happened in October 2023. A couple months ago, that court case I mentioned finally made its way through the various dockets, and Israel was given the green light to turn it into a military training zone. So then the demolitions start really ramping up. They come in and demolish almost this entire village. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but Khair, something like that. About a month ago, I think they demolished 90% of the structures there, and they begin actually turning it into a new neighborhood for the neighboring settlement. On Monday, there was some construction going on there, and one of the, technically I think it's a bulldozer, except it did not have like a scoop thing. It just had like what looked like just a giant, I don't know, like a point at the end of it. And so the guy who was driving that goes out of his way to just drive through the village and sever a water line. Now, this is a really big deal. Water is scarce for Palestinians in the West Bank. These settlers and the government have built an entire system of water apartheid to basically divert all water to go into the settlements. And so, they did have one water line. Bulldozer just comes and severs it, which is, again, so this is a very big deal. So a couple of locals come out, and he's still coming towards the village. So locals come out to confront them and try to stop them. And the guy driving the bulldozer starts swinging the thing around and knocks a guy unconscious, Ahmed. So now someone's been knocked unconscious by the bulldozer. Yinon Levy, the known violent terrorist, then goes into the village, actually. And I think everybody has seen the video. He starts shouting and waving his gun around. And there is a crowd of people, confronting him. But I can't emphasize enough that this village does not have armed resistance. This was not a fight. One side had guns and huge construction equipment. The other side was shepherds. And everyone's seen the video. He starts shooting, and he actually shoots somebody that was not even there, was in a community center working with children. And so the people who were there didn't even realize right away what had happened. And then they find out somebody was shot. And I can get into what happened after that, but those are the basic details.
Let's go to a video of Odeh's cousin, Allah, talking about who he was. This is from Democracy Now!
And they shoot Odeh, the peaceful resistance man. Odeh is the teachers. Odeh is the father of the two children. Odeh is my cousins. Is my sister's husband. 3 sons left without father. Because why? Because Yinon Levy, Trump decided to lift the sanction from him and give him the permission to continue to kill the Palestinians. This is what we see every day. This is what we're suffering every day. This is not from today. 4 years ago, they killed also my uncle Sheikh Suleiman. By the same way, by the bulldozers run over him. When this will stop? We just want to live in peace, with our dignity, with our freedom, without suffering, with our rights.
And not only did Trump lift sanctions on the murderer here, Yinon Levy, also when the victim, the man he killed, Odeh, traveled to the U.S. in June to San Francisco to deliver some talks. He was even though he had a visa, he was denied entry. He was deported back to Palestine, where he was now murdered. So, like, the U.S. role here in his killing is on top of basically giving a green light to his murder. Also, Odeh was denied entry to the U.S.
Odeh wrote a piece for 972 magazine almost exactly a year ago. That is literally, it is about how when he was a child, he grew up terrified of the bulldozers, terrified of the men with the guns, and all that he wanted was for his children to not have to have that same fear growing up. And now his 4 children, I think between 7 months and 5 years old, if they have any memories of their father, it's going to be, this. I want to explain what happened after the shooting in a second, but it's just worth saying that, obviously what's happening in Gaza is it's the most unspeakable thing that anybody could ever imagine. It's a genocide. If you are being unbelievably generous, which I know is none of us here should be, you could say they have Hamas to justify it, basically, right? That's what the people will point to. They'll say, well, we have to fight Hamas. Obviously, it's bullshit, but that's what they say. Hamas is not present in the West Bank. To the extent that it is, it's a handful of people, maybe. There's the armed resistance in the West Bank. It's not centralized the way it is in Gaza. It's not part of the government. There are these underground groups, and they're pretty much just in a couple refugee camps in cities. And they're not ever going into Israel. There are occasionally attacks on illegal settlements or settlers driving. But the point is that there is not even a fraudulent, plausible defense for what they're doing there. And when you see a video of what happened, and then actually I will explain what happened. So after the shooting, he basically, the medic tried to save Odeh, and he was not able to. And he probably died on his way to the hospital in an ambulance. But after that, an entire squadron of soldiers comes into the village, rounds the villagers up into a fenced-in area, and then the shooter, Yinon Levy, is standing in the middle, pointing out people who he says threw stones. And the soldiers are going in and grabbing people one by one, blindfolding them, and dragging them into their military vehicles. And I mean, when you see the video, the body language, I mean, this guy, the shooter, he could not possibly be more just at ease with the soldiers. I mean, and there's about 30 of them. And so the just to close the circle on this, like, this is an army that is directly supporting a terrorist, right. To say nothing of the terrorism of the army itself. And so, and like, I think there's this tendency of some, liberal Zionists to treat the settlers like this sort of offshoot, it's this thing off to the side. But I mean, we're talking about the military, and we're talking about the government, the federal government directly supporting terror, arming these people, and not even having a facade of trying to investigate the shooting. So after that, the killer was brought in for a sham hearing and then released on house arrest. I think I heard in less than an hour. 5 of the Palestinian villagers who we had pointed out are still in prison. Who knows what's happening to them? And the IDF is holding onto the body of Odeh Hathalin. And when they tried to mourn on Tuesday, the soldiers came in and broke it up. So, like, the point is, I mean, the level of sadism and cruelty from top to bottom, from the government to the soldiers to the settlers to the legal system to the judge, I mean, it's just like, it's beyond comprehension. And so that's why I say you could actually take Gaza out of the picture, and just what is happening in the West Bank alone should be enough to sever all ties with the state of Israel and treat it like a belligerent, hostile country, which is obviously what it is. And, I can't blame people for paying more attention to Gaza than the West Bank. But, Israel has effectively annexed the West Bank under the cover of the war. And people are increasingly being killed and driven out of their homes. And people just are not really paying attention to it. So,
of course, it's worth noting that this is someone who had relative protection and a relative high profile, having been involved in an Oscar award-winning documentary, but that obviously didn't protect him. And it doesn't protect you either if you are a U.S. citizen, because Safola Moussalet, a Palestinian American who ran an ice cream shop in Florida, was killed by Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank as well. Can you talk about this?
Yeah. Saif Moussalet was he was visiting his hometown in the West Bank, which is actually like a wealthy suburb, actually, that has a lot of Palestinian Americans in it. And but what's happening basically is right next to this place is this village called Sinjil. Sinjil has been terrorized by settlers for years. The military came in and literally built a giant iron fence around it. And basically what was happening is that the settlement was beginning to encroach more and more from just terrorizing Sinjil to also terrorizing this sort of wealthier village next door. And so people from both villages, from Sinjil and from the one where Moussalet was from, would come out to protest the settlers who would come in, with their construction equipment, and they would build and they would terrorize them and shoot. And there was some sort of a skirmish, and he was shot dead. Somebody else was shot dead. Of course, they prevented ambulances from coming. And the military came and did nothing. Nobody's been imprisoned for it. Oddly enough, Mike Huckabee made a kind of strong statement about it. He called it a terrorist act. And then he's done nothing since then, as far as I know, to find accountability. But I point that out because I'll tell you who has not said anything. Chuck Schumer has not said anything about an American being killed. Kristen Gillibrand has not said anything about an American being killed. Most senators have not. I mean, you don't even have to say the 2 Republican senators, Rick Scott and Ashley Moody. Neither of them have said anything. Ron DeSantis has not commented on his constituent being killed in the West Bank. So yes, I mean, the level of impunity is of course just obscene.
Well, shifting gears, you have a really fascinating and disturbing piece at Dropsite News about the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, and you look at a fascinating coordinated talking points war that is taking place right now and a shifting narrative. Can you elaborate on that?
The effort to dismantle the UN's aid distribution network in Gaza, UNRWA, which excuse me, had operated over 400 aid points, had been around for decades, had been safely and securely distributing food and medicine and other forms of aid for a very long time. The effort to smear it as, infiltrated by Hamas and or either that or being looted by Hamas or both or ineffective, the kettle logic of like it's Hamas or it's ineffective or whatever it is, like that was a propaganda campaign that has been going on for years. But right as the war started in November 2023, there is reporting that shows that Israeli military and business officials came together and started talking about how do we build a new aid system that we can basically control. And in January 2024, they bring on a company called Orbis. Orbis is basically an intelligence contractor. And they work with the Israeli military for months and months. And within Orbis, they devise what we now know as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to be clear, there's nobody with any humanitarian experience involved there. I mean, humanitarian work is a field with its own set of principles and guidelines and skills that people should have. The GHF is run by a ex-CIA officer who worked at Orbis, an intelligence contractor. It is staffed by mercenaries and information warfare specialists. And so what my story gets into is from Orbis, two different groups are spun out of it. The first one is called Safe Reach Solutions. Safe Reach Solutions is the company that basically oversees the whole sort of aid distribution operation in Gaza. And then the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is like the on the ground actual like provider of the aid. And then there's like UG Solutions is a security contractor, but there's this whole sort of shadowy web of companies that are like deeply connected to CIA and IDF and just like various military and intelligence groups. And so one of the people who was at Orbis, meaning the company that was devising this militarized aid plan, and then as soon as Safe Reach Solutions was spun out, made the jump over to Safe Reach Solutions, is somebody named Jen Counter. Now, I need to just say, I have not been able to find direct evidence of her working on any sort of communication campaign for the GAF or any sort of propaganda. But what I can say is that Safe Reach Solutions doesn't have any other business. What SRS does is the militarized aid system. Jen's own biography is that she is a specialist in offensive influence campaigns that are meant to dominate the adversary. And basically, when you dive into her experience, again, it's not in humanitarian work, but it is in it's in what she even calls in some cases propaganda. And she wrote this when I was like looking into her. There's this fascinating article that she wrote right after the war broke out. This is I think in December 2024. And what she basically says in it is that after the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, the terrorists around the Middle East took that as a signal that the U.S. had taken its eye off of terrorism, and they decided that they could then start ramping up their own operations. And what she says is that we now are deeply lacking in intelligence in the Middle East, and she makes a case for innovative private public government partnerships. Working with countries like Israel to have a presence in the Middle East where we can be gathering intelligence and, basically pursuing the U.S.'s national security interests. I say that in scare quotes. So this person makes a jump to Safe Reach Solutions, where she is a subject matter expert, is her actual job title. I should say she's also a teacher at Columbia. She teaches strategic communications at Columbia. And on her faculty bio on Columbia's website, there's an article that she wrote called the 16 Rules for Offensive Influence Campaigns, or something to that effect. And in it, she outlines a playbook that, and again, I this is speculation, but the playbook tracks remarkably well to the campaign of smears and deception and misinformation that led them to oust UNRWA, the UN's aid system, and replace it with the GHF. And so that's one piece of this puzzle. The other main figure that I cover is a guy named Chapin Fay. Chapin Fay is actually public facing. So this guy, up until July, we're in July, he was, again, no experience in any humanitarian work, or if there was, it's certainly not on his very, very thorough LinkedIn and personal website. He is a Republican operative and a PR and crisis communication specialist. He's worked for a number of Republican candidates. He worked for Lee Zeldin's campaign. Lee Zeldin, of course, went on to become one of the most pro-Israel members of Congress. Now he actually runs the EPA. After that, he went and he started his own PR and crisis comms agency. And he would make he became a TV pundit. Just a couple months ago, he was on Bloomberg television defending RFK Jr.'s slashing of health and human services. This guy is basically airdropped in to be the on-the-ground spokesperson for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And he is now all over their Twitter page, all over their press materials, talking about things like Women's Only Day at the GHF, where he does not mention that 2 women were shot dead. He's pushing the lies about Hamas looting the UN. And I should just say, the way I stumbled into all of this was by seeing this incredibly brazen, coordinated campaign to push this new lie last week that there were 950 UN trucks full of aid inside the Gaza border that had been abandoned by the UN, and that the food was now rotting. And so this message just went out everywhere all at once. And so that's how I started backtracking to find the basic PR operation behind it.
What's funny about the PR for the GHF, officially called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I think people have called it should more accurately be called the Gaza Holocaust Front, is that a journalist named Jack Polson has pointed this out, that even though it's staffed by all these people who have ties to evangelical groups, the far right, mercenary firms, their PR people are liberals. So 7 Letter, which works for UG Solutions, which you mentioned, they just recently hired Sabrina Singh, who is the Pentagon spokesperson under Biden. Right. And there's also SKDK, another firm.
And she worked for Kamala Harris too, Aaron.
There we go. Okay, yeah, there we go. And then there's also this firm SKDK, which works for Israel's foreign ministry, and they recently hired Vedant Patel, who was a State Department spokesperson also under Biden, and was notorious for following his boss Matthew Miller and just completely whitewashing Israel's genocide. So you have this convergence between. It shows really there the bipartisan coalition.
I would call it a bipartisan PR effort.
Yeah. It's like right-wing mercenaries represented by liberal spokespeople, liberal PR firms.
Yeah, and I think this probably does not need to be directly pointed out, but this person, Jen Counter, is she's an Atlantic Council fellow. She's a teacher in good standing at Columbia. I'm sure that she will not face any accountability for any role that she may have had in this. Meanwhile, at Columbia, they have expelled or suspended over 70 students for peacefully occupying a library to protest genocide. And so it just, when you think about these Biden, the Democratic and Republican operatives across the board who are deeply involved in perpetrating this mass starvation campaign and this genocide. I mean, it really is like a bipartisan group of people who thrive in polite society, will all go on to, have their careers just flourish from this. And the people on the right side of history are right now. I'm talking to a couple of the Columbia student activists who are trying to find jobs. And it's hard because when you Google them, you learn that they are terrorists and anti-Semites and blah, blah, blah. And of course, these are all lies, but it's the first thing that comes up when you Google them.
Speaking of Columbia University, you have looked into the fascinating case of Shai Davidai, a business professor at Columbia who has engaged creatively with many students at Columbia, harassed them, doxed them, Palestinian students, pro-Palestine students. Now he's no longer at Columbia. He says that he left of his own accord and was exonerated. But what's the real story?
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
Well, that was an excellent interview. And next up is an interview that I did with two activists. Huwaida Arraf is a Palestinian-American human rights lawyer, and Bob Suberi is a Jewish-American activist. And they were both aboard the Handala civilian ship, which was trying to get to Gaza to deliver much-needed humanitarian aid. It was intercepted. They were detained, and they have been released, and they are here to talk about it with us right now. Thank you so much for joining us, Bob and Huwaida. Tell us where you're joining us from right now and what brought you here.
Well, I'll start. I am in my family's village up in the Galilee, and I am here because, I like to be with my family, but I wasn't planning on actually being here in 48. I was planning on being in Gaza, but Israeli naval commandos kidnapped me and Bob and 19 of our colleagues as we were on our way to Gaza, kidnapped us from international waters and brought us against our will here. And so because Bob and I have citizenship, like Israeli citizenship, they can't deport us like they did our other colleagues aboard the Handala. They could either prosecute us or release us, and they set us free. So Bob will explain where he is. I am now with my family in the Galilee.
And where are you, Bob?
I'm in the village of Khair, in Masafar Yatta, the South Hebron Hills of the West Bank.
And can you explain why you're outside?
I'm outside because we've had repeated raids by the army, and the villagers are out mourning the death of one of their leaders, one of the community leaders, forgive me. He was killed 3 days ago, 2.5 days ago, by just a very radical settler who had been actually sanctioned by the Biden administration. Trump lifted those sanctions, and he's free to carry on his terrorist activities. He's been involved in the destruction of other villages in the Masafar Yatta area.
Wow. Well, thank you guys again so much for what you're doing. And Huwaida, can you set up what happened this time with the Handala and how this is building on other trips that you guys have made?
The Freedom Flotilla Coalition, we have been sailing to try to break Israel's illegal siege on Gaza since 2010. And before that, I was involved with the Free Gaza movement, which actually started this effort to break the naval blockade via the sea. So for 17 years, the Free Gaza movement and then the Freedom Flotilla Coalition have been trying to break Israel's naval blockade and putting pressure on our governments not to respect a naval blockade, a siege that was collectively punishing Palestinian civilians, which is unlawful. It's a war crime, and now it's being used as a tool of genocide. We have a situation, unfortunately, where everybody, the whole global community, is not challenging, is kind of colluding with Israel's illegal siege and blockade. And we are still encouraging people to break it. So Handala was ship number 37 in the years that we have been doing this. In the last couple of months, we've sent, in May, we tried to send a ship called the Conscience, which Israel bombed in European waters right outside of Malta. The morning that people were supposed to board the ship, it hadn't even started heading towards Gaza. 18 civilians were on it. The rest were supposed to board when Israel bombed that ship. Luckily, we had only minor injuries, but Europe, Malta, nobody held Israel accountable. So now Israel can go into European airspace, European waters, and bomb a civilian ship, and Europe and the world is silent. The following month, we sent the Madlin last month, and Israel hijacked, pirated that ship in international waters, kidnapped the 12 civilians on board, and proceeded to then deport them to their countries. Again, it breaks not only the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, international humanitarian law. You have Israel violating these laws in order to maintain an illegal blockade that is deliberately starving civilians before the eyes of the world. But we cannot stop. We cannot, some people ask, well, what is different? What is different is that the situation is even more dire and more people need to mobilize to break Israel's siege. We see lots of people trying to send food, but Israel is controlling and dripping food in. And we see what's been done with the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is just a militarized aid distribution system, and not even aid distribution system. It's being used to lure people and then kill them in order to just get a cup of rice. So what is happening is an engineered famine, and it's not enough to say we are concerned about civilians starving in Gaza. It's civilians being starved, and anyone who is not challenging and trying to break this blockade is colluding with it. And so as the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, we said we're going to keep sailing. We're going to urge others to sail also with us, because the whole world needs to be trying to break this blockade. So we were at sea with the Handala, a small vessel. We carried only humanitarian aid, mainly food, some medicine, diapers, baby formula, and teddy bears donated from kids in Italy, which is where we set off to, kids in Gaza. So we were at sea for about 7 days, on the 7th day before Israel launched its naval assault on our ship. So Israel sent out its most elite naval commando force to take over a small boat to prevent baby formula and teddy bears from getting into kids in Gaza who are being deliberately starved.
And we actually have very powerful video of you, Huwaida, speaking to addressing the Israeli authorities as they attempt to board and then kidnap you. Let's have a listen to that.
You bear sole responsibility for your actions and your consequences.
Israeli Navy, this is a civilian vessel, Handala. Let me give you a lesson in international law. Any blockade that deliberately starves a civilian population is a violation of international law. It is not only that, it is a war crime. You have no legal authority to enforce an unlawful blockade, and as such, you have no authority to use force to enforce an unlawful blockade. Therefore, we demand that you stand down. You are responsible for the well-being of every civilian on board this vessel. As an occupying power in Gaza, you are responsible for the health and well-being of the civilian population there. Not only have you disregarded that obligation, but you are actively exterminating the people. You have engineered a famine. You are deliberately starving civilians and children before the eyes of the world. Our vessel does not constitute any threat to you. We carry only humanitarian aid, and therefore you have no authority to intercept or otherwise attack our vessel. We demand again that you stand down.
So that was incredible. Can you describe, both of you, what the moments leading up to that were like and what happened right after?
So we read in the Israeli media that Israel was saying it was going to give us the chance to turn around, and if we did not accept, then it would seize our vessel. Now, I only bring that up because Israel did not attempt to contact us in any way. So just another example of them lying. And I proactively picked up the VHF radio to contact them to make sure they knew that we are a civilian vessel carrying only humanitarian aid to children who they are deliberately starving, and they have no legal authority to get in our way, to attack us or to otherwise intercept us. And again, to make it clear that we are a civilian vessel and they are not to use force against us. For at least an hour, they did not respond, even though I heard them responding to other vessels on the VHF radio on channel 16, which all vessels in a certain area communicate on. So they heard us. Not only were they not reaching out to us, but they were deliberately ignoring our calls. Finally, they did respond, and I think you played the end of what they were saying, is that we are heading towards an area that is under naval blockade. And then they spewed some stuff about Hamas, as they always do, and said that they would take action to enforce this naval blockade under international law, which is absolutely ridiculous because they have no authority under international law. And so I did say, under actually international law, any blockade that deliberately starves a civilian population is unlawful. It is a war crime. You have no authority to enforce an illegal blockade, and therefore you cannot use force to enforce an illegal blockade. So stand down. And they stopped responding to us. The ships that we saw on the radar were coming closer to us. We saw at any point 7 or 8 ships, and they were coming right at us within minutes. And when they weren't responding, I knew an attack was imminent.
One of the people on the Handala was Chris Smalls, who is the Amazon labor leader. He founded the Amazon Labor Union, and he was mistreated in a way that was much harsher than any other participants on the boat. Can you talk about what happened to him and why you think it happened to him? And it bears mentioning that he is the only Black person on the flotilla.
Chris Smalls was beat up. He was singled out for rough and abusive treatment. Everyone was treated poorly, but he was physically assaulted. Lawyers reported seeing marks on his neck and on his legs. He was kicked. And then all of them, we all went on immediate hunger strike after Israel attacked us and took over our vessel because, one, we knew that their propaganda, they not only jumped on our vessel with their weapons, but with their cameras. And they began filming, they began trying to give us food and water, which we rejected. And then they were trying to literally force us to take their food and water so they can film themselves giving us food and water, to which we said, we're not taking anything from an entity that is deliberately starving children. If you think our lives are more important than the lives of the children in Gaza that you are starving, they're not, and we're not being part of your propaganda. So they literally were trying to put stuff in front of us and film themselves, giving us the stuff so they can make their whole humanitarian film about how wonderful they are. We did not play into it, but continued also their hunger strike after we got on the ship when people went into Israeli prisons. And because everyone was on hunger strike collectively, they were punished collectively. So there was really unsanitary conditions, bed bugs, no ventilation. And because they were on hunger strike, Israel punished them by allowing them no yard time. So they got no sunlight, no daylight, no fresh air whatsoever, and then subjected to verbal abuse on top of everything else, all because we were trying to take baby formula into children who are starving in Gaza. But Chris specifically, he was physically beaten up at the port shortly after we first arrived. And then they continued to kind of single him out. And the last example of singling him out was yesterday. They said there were three Americans left, and they sent 2 pretty much on direct flights out. But Chris, they held on to him, and then instead of sending him out on a flight from Tel Aviv, sent him to Jordan, and then from Jordan want to fly him to Dubai, and from Dubai to the United States, not to arrive until days after everyone else, just as a final way of messing with him. We absolutely believe it was discriminatory treatment, and you can guess why. We knew those of us who were going to be most vulnerable and more susceptible to violent discriminatory treatment because Israel is a racist, discriminatory country. And we knew that. I actually had a chance to talk to Chris after he was freed, and he told me, he's like, yeah, I'm okay. We knew this would happen, and we did. That doesn't make it acceptable at all. And equally unacceptable is the fact that the American embassy and consulate provided zero services to any of the Americans. They never contacted Bob and I. They never contacted the other five. Even after hearing what happened to Chris, even after repeatedly asking for American consular services, they got nothing. Meanwhile, other consulates, other countries, European, Australians, they not only provided these services, they were at the port to meet their nationals. Americans, after 3-4 days, didn't even ask about their citizens. And that's just, as we know, Israel, the United States is constantly elevating Israeli dictates, Israeli policy, whatever's good for Israel over the lives and the rights of their own citizens.
And what is next for each of you personally in terms of where you're going, and also what is next for the Freedom Flotilla, given this latest, I don't know if you call it a defeat, because the fact that you guys are still alive and sent this ship again, despite what happened last time, is in itself a victory. But obviously you've been stopped from Gaza. So what's next for everyone?
I do want to say that the deplorable treatment that the Handala 21, all of us were subjected to, more so those who were locked up, is nothing compared to what Palestinian prisoners are faced. There are over 10,000 Palestinian political prisoners locked up in Israeli dungeons, and they face much worse treatment. They have no other consulates or embassies asking about them. They have no one putting pressure on them. We had thousands of people around the world amplifying what was happening to the Handala 21 and calling embassies and foreign ministries, etc. So they did. As bad as it was and as unjustified as it was, we felt supported. Whereas again, over 10,000 Palestinian political prisoners, over 300 of them children, and they are disappeared in Israeli dungeons. They have zero rights, and they're not only being severely abused, they're being tortured. In the past 2 years alone, there are 80, those that we know of, Israel is not even admitting to all of them, who have been killed as a result of torture and starvation in Israeli dungeons. So we want to use whatever focus is on us and what happened to us to highlight how much worse it is for Palestinians, and also obviously to keep focus on what's happening in Gaza and the fact the world needs to unite to break down the walls of this extermination camp that Israel has created in Gaza. So we won't stop. Yes, we didn't reach Gaza this time, but we can't stop trying to reach Gaza. We can't give in to Israel's brutality and military might, nor this world order that Israel, the United States, and Western powers want us to accept. It's a world that there is no respect for international rights, no humanitarian law. It's a world where nobody is safe. And so today, Palestinians are being exterminated. If we're not able to rise up and stop this, then tomorrow it can be anyone. So we are actively working now on planning the next flotilla. I don't have a date, but I can tell you for sure that Israel's violence, whatever Israel does, won't stop us, and we need to continue shaming our governments for everything that they're saying now, of being concerned about Palestinians starving in Gaza. No, it's not Palestinians starving in Gaza. It's Palestinians being deliberately starved in Gaza. And it is, sorry that photos of emaciated children don't sit well with your constituency, but expressing this kind of concern without actually voting and moving and mobilizing to sanction Israel, to cut off weapons, to cut off all business relationships with Israel, to hold Israel accountable for what it's doing is not good enough. And we're not going to let you forget it. We're going to keep the pressure up. People are doing different things all over the world. As far as the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, we are going to continue sailing. And I hope people in Gaza can hear us when we say we will not stop trying to get to you. Because in the end, Katie, I think but it's worth repeating that this is not just about getting food into Gaza. And Palestinians always say, we can feed ourselves. We need our freedom. We need our rights. And the world is allowing Israel to do this is a damn shame it's an indictment on all of us, really. But we at the Freedom Flotilla Coalition will keep sailing.
I'm doing what's next right now. I'm, like I said, I'm in the village of BOMBSHELL. A very close friend of mine and a leader in this community was brutally murdered. And not only was he murdered, but the insult upon injury has been the nightly raids, kidnapping leading members of this community, and it's not that big of a community. 18 of them were incarcerated. There have been raids every night, and their intention is to make, obviously, life so miserable that they will leave. Now, I mean, this community is under a tremendous amount of pressure. They lost one of the leading figures of their community. They're trying to mourn. They built a tent, and the settlers during the mourning period have been doing like major construction, not construction they need to do, but construction to disrupt the mourning ceremony that's going on. There are lots of people coming in from surrounding villages. Also, many activists are showing up. The army then declares a closed military zone, and so only the people living in the community can stay. And the first day of mourning, Huwaida was there, and they started lobbing shock grenades and tear gas and pushing people out of the way, and just being very physical and violent. While people are trying to mourn. We also are trying to get the body back, of the victim, and they're putting all sorts of conditions on it. They're saying we can't. They won't send the body back to Khair, and the brother of the victim insisted that the body must be returned here and that we must have a proper funeral for him. And then they started putting restrictions on the number of people that can attend the funeral, and on and so forth. It's just been insult upon injury, and this community is absolutely determined to carry on and carry out their traditional ceremonies with regard to respecting their dead. And I mean, it's so honorable. I'm just in awe of their, their resourcefulness and resilience in, carrying out what they need to do in spite of everything that's going on around them, and in spite of the obstacles put in their way, and the indignity that is imposed upon them. Yeah, I mean, it's both beautiful and really, really ugly at the same time.
And last question for both of you guys. Can you explain to us how you both, each of you, got involved in this struggle?
I mean, I am Palestinian. I was born in the United States, but it is my people's liberation struggle. And I got actively kind of involved on the ground when I moved to the occupied Palestinian territory after graduating from college, and horrified by a lot of things that I saw right before my eyes. I helped co-found the International Solidarity Movement, which I was just going to say, if people are interested in joining Bob and others in standing in solidarity with the community, I urge people to look into joining the International Solidarity Movement. Look us up online, how to join us. Palestinians really need people to also be here on the ground, because there isn't much focus at all about what's happening in the West Bank, and Israel is depopulating the West Bank. I mean, ethnic cleansing has also picked up here. Tens of thousands of people have been made homeless in the last few months alone. And so people who can come here, we actively encourage them to do so. International Solidarity Movement. And from there, I got involved in ISM activists that started trying to break the naval siege, the naval blockade on Gaza. And so I've, for a long time, just been involved in nonviolent direct action. Being on the Handala, that was my ninth mission, which is sad to say, honestly, that we have to keep doing this because our governments are so utterly failing to to uphold their obligations to respect international law and human rights and to stand up for human dignity. And but what we say is when our governments fail, then average people have to act. And so that's what we're doing. I've been in this kind of nonviolent direct action stuff for a while.
And what about you, Bob?
I have a long, complicated history with Israel, and I won't go into it. I'll leave it to say I'm a recovering Zionist. I made a trip over to the West Bank on a delegation through CJNV, the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, in 2019, and was shocked with what I saw. And the flotilla idea came along. I signed up for it in 2018, thought about it, and realized that I have family in Israel. My parents immigrated from there, and well, no, they didn't immigrate from Israel. They immigrated from Palestine in 1938, 1939. So technically, I'm a Jewish Palestinian. And yeah, so I was shocked with what I saw, and I wanted to get more involved. The flotilla idea came along. I was told about it through a mutual friend, and I signed up for it. But then COVID hit, and then in the interim, during COVID, I decided, I'm gonna go back to Palestine. I had the opportunity to go on a pilot delegation for 3 months, and actually live there, which was an opportunity that I jumped at, and it really changed my whole, mindset about the Israel-Palestine struggle after seeing the conditions Palestinians had to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and the arrogant attitude of the settlers, which, I just couldn't relate to. My fellow Jews, I couldn't relate to, the disregard, and the indignities that they imposed upon the Palestinians, and the dignified way in which Palestinians dealt with it nonviolently and carried on with their lives and raised children that had childhoods, that laughed, that enjoyed their childhood. I mean, that's really, really important in this village that I'm in right now. That's why you see them all around me. They're very much part of the furniture around here, and I came to love these people, and I've been coming back ever since, spending months at a time, and we've really come to know each other. We've come to love each other. This is my home away from home, so to speak, and I'm going to stay here for as long as they need my support. I had a long talk with the late Oda's brother just before coming on this website. He was in tears, and he said, "I've got to mourn, but I've got to carry on and lead this community. I got to carry on my brother's tradition." And I said, "Yeah, you got to mourn, and you have a community here. We need to rely on that community to help support the community, and I'll be here as long as you need me." I really love these people. I really hate seeing what's happening with them and how they're being treated, the total disregard of their humanity. But I love them, and the Handala was a tremendous experience. I'm so happy that I'm here now. Not happy regarding what happened, but happy to be able to be of service. For me, it's an honor to be here. And again, I want to thank Huwaida for her leadership, and I want to thank you for giving us this platform.
Well, thank you guys so much. Both of you have really inspiring stories, and it's not lost on me that you're literally risking your lives. Huwaida, I know you have children. I just want to thank both of you so much because you're really walking the walk.
Well, Katie, I mean, thank you. I always say this, and I truly, truly mean it. I mean, those of us who are on the boats or doing that work, it all works hand in hand. If we didn't have journalists, like incredibly, not just kind of brave, but ethical, moral journalists, truth tellers like you, and activists around the world supporting them, we would just be a couple dozen people on a ship in the middle of the Mediterranean. It is everything else that goes into making that happen. Hundreds of people who don't actually get on the ship but work behind the scenes, and thousands of people around the world that amplify and give it the pressure that is needed to make the point, to educate, to put the pressure on our government. So we're all working together. We just all have to work in wherever lane we are, whatever, as long as we're all doing something. I say that all the time. No, we're not doing any more than you're doing, any more than your listeners. If they're making phone calls, if they're amplifying messages, if they're putting pressure, if they're mobilizing politically, we're up against a lot, and we just all have to do whatever we can. So thank you for all you do, for giving us this opportunity, and we just got to keep on.
Yeah, I don't see it as, of course, I'm 77, but I don't see it as putting my life in harm's way. I love these people. I mean, they have opened up a world to me and a chapter in my life that I've found very fulfilling. I mean, I come here because I want to come here. I love sailing. My wife and I sailed around the world, and I love being on the gondola, just being on the water. So I'm really just doing the things that I love to do. And, I've had a battle with the ideology that I grew up with. But that's the biggest risk that I've taken. Really, it's an ideological one, not a physical threat.
Thank you guys both so much.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. Take care.
And thanks again to Huwaida Arraf and Bob Suberi for joining us. And before that, we heard from the great journalist, Jasper Nathaniel. Follow them all. These are all people on the ground trying to do what they can to expose Israeli crimes backed by the U.S. And especially Huwaida and Bob joining with all those other brave people, putting their bodies on the line to try to break the blockade of Gaza. I just have infinite respect for all of them and everyone else on their ship, including Christian Smalls, who you guys talked about, Amazon labor organizer, beaten by Israeli forces after being kidnapped.
Right. Much more than others were, because he was the only Black person.
All right. Well, that's our show. To support Useful Idiots and get bonus content, including an extended interview this week with Jasper Nathaniel, go to our website, usefulidiotspodcast.com. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.